Alright, so now we're ready for question 18, and here 18 through 22 are perhaps some of the more difficult questions, especially 18 because it's so subjective and it's going to depend a lot on your individual context. Here we're going to ask you how to judge how familiar you think the content of the book would be for the target audience. Now the target audience would be the child speakers of the language that the book is written in, which will most likely be a national or local language. If you are dealing with what we call shell books, which are books perhaps in English or French or Portuguese that organizations have made available for translation into local languages, then you may have it in one of the European languages, and it will be a little more difficult because it hasn't actually been translated yet. So in those cases you will have to make your judgment based on the children in your country as a whole. If it is actually already in a local language, then you can limit your judgment to the speakers of that local language and perhaps their culture if they're from a certain region in the country or a certain religion, dominant religious group or whatever. Then you can be a little more specific in who your target audience is. But in general, your target audience will be some of the child speakers in your country, and more specifically in the language that the book is written in. So we have in our guidelines some very broad and basic guidelines of what these three levels of distinctions are: either very familiar, semi-familiar, or mostly unfamiliar. And there's a lot of gray area here, unfortunately, but we want to try to be as consistent as possible. So very familiar would be things related to the child's immediate world that they will have been exposed to, their home environment, school, their village, familiar daily routines, activities around the home, at school, family relationships, friendships, common objects and animals in their environment, even folk tales, using animals even if the animal isn't something they see every day, but it's something that they hear about and they know about and are aware of because it's a common animal in the region or a common animal in local folk tales. And that would be fine too. Common occupations that the adults have in farming or fishing or whatever. So things that they will have very likely been exposed to by primary school age. Semi-familiar is, either it contains a lot of familiar elements, but then there are certain things that are a little different, or perhaps the characters don't look exactly like them. We have some shell books from other languages where the people may dress a little differently, or they may not look exactly like they do, but they are still doing similar activities. Or perhaps it is if the environment is depicted as a very dry environment and your target group lives in a very wet jungle type environment, and yet in other parts of their same country they could find those kinds of dry environments. So it's not completely unknown or unheard of in the larger context of the country as a whole. Perhaps your children live mostly in the rural areas and it has scenes from a city, but yet a typically African city that they would be likely to encounter if they went to your capital city, etc. So this is kind of a midway point between what is very common and well known to them in their daily lives and what is really quite foreign. So mostly unfamiliar would be certainly things that are set in Europe with very European things or American things that are not very common in the African context, or exotic fictional worlds that are not common themes well known in folk tales, or all the characters are white people wearing completely Western clothes and playing in the snow, and things that the children just have had no exposure to at all, as well as some scientific concepts, maybe outer space, or these more technical areas that they really haven't had very much exposure to. And in the next video I will give you examples of each of these.